All right. So, Aaron, can you hear me?
Hey, Michael, I can hear you. I'm on a separate call with Nate.
Oh, got it. I just sent him an invite to the spaces.
Okay, yeah, we're working on it. He's going to be joining in just a second.
Cool. Sweet. Nate, what's good, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, dude. How's Austin treating you?
Good. It's about 100 degrees here, so we keep waiting for summer to end. But yeah, always good.
Awesome, man. You doing anything for Labor Day weekend?
No, not really. Just my wife's out of town, so I'm holding down the fort with our kids and get a little bit done. How about you?
Same. We have our daughter's first birthday party on Sunday. It's technically her. No, it's not Friday yet. She turns 1 tomorrow, but then we're doing the first birthday party at our place on Sunday. My mom's coming in for it. We were debating going to the U.S. Open, but that's kind of a TBD. But that'd be a Saturday thing.
What's funny is that is actually where my wife is right now. She just flew out there today. So.
Oh, awesome, dude! You should have come out to New York. We could have done this live.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I got to stay here to make sure the house doesn't fall apart while she's gone. So maybe next time.
Hold up the roof from the inside.
That's right.
Nice. All right. So, in terms of how we want to do this is the first time we've put it together. Are we also live on other venues, Aaron? Can you hear us?
He dropped the studio.
All right. Aaron, what's good? So it looks like he dropped off. So yeah, I mean, do you know if we ended up doing the live on the other platforms as well?
Everything that he linked.
I don't believe so. No.
Yeah, he said yes, I can, and we are.
Oh yeah, the answer to that actually, Nate, is yes, we are, and it's on I think LinkedIn and YouTube. Is that possibly right?
Correct.
All right, we got Aaron the magician, and Chris over here, kind of working magic. So, there are. It looks like 3 people listening, so I think we have a quorum. So Nate, I can just kind of set the stage. I was going back and forth with a couple people on the Claude Code Twitter space, I think a Sunday or 2 ago, and I was chatting about a project that we were using Claude Code SDK in the background for, where we were running a lot of Claude Code sessions in parallel on a server to basically scan a database and pull in stored procs and start mapping out the flow of data in a larger enterprise environment. And it was actually pretty badass. We've been doing that for a little bit now, and I shared it on the Claude Code community within Twitter, and you replied, and we went back and forth for a little bit, and then we had this kind of awesome call last Sunday, and basically said, hey, dude, we should hop on a Twitter space and see if there's anyone else that's just doing some really gnarly kind of experimental stuff with Claude Code. And I guess that's what brought us to today. I pinged Aaron, who does all of our, he's a creative director, producer of a podcast. We also have the Hedgineer podcast. We talk about technology, data, and AI, and he coordinated with with Chris over here at French Podcast and said like, hey, let's just do this live. I have a coworker here, Colson, Shu, that works with us quite as well. It's also speaking, but that's basically setting the stage. And so Nate, what's one of the things that you were sharing last time is we were talking about how you were using both the custom display setting, and you were showing like this cool plugin that you had where you could show available tokens. Then Claude Code actually released some features that did exactly that. I saw you had an awesome post on the context functionality. So what's new with you when you're using Claude Code lately?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've been spending the most time with recently, other than just getting stuff done with it, but I mean, as far as like tweaking the system itself, the big thing that I've been focused on recently is context. And both in terms of, because I kept running into this issue where I would get the context built up, just for the problem at hand. I have this big mono repo, so I have, multiple apps in it. I have front-end folders, back-end folders. So especially in my case, with a larger repository, it's really important to get the context built up for the problem at hand. Otherwise, it's just, as I'm sure we've all experienced, it's not going to know what to do. So, I had some custom commands that would...
Uh-oh, did I lose you?
Issue. Your context would fill up and you'd hit compaction, and every single time it got noticeably worse after compaction.
Oh, for sure.
And yeah, so my first attempt at solving it was to do this. I had this like handoff and handoff resume thing where I was like, well, if it's going to compact the state anyway, I might as well do it myself and build up my own custom one. But even that wasn't nearly as good. So what I've been focused on in the last couple of weeks is like, how do you just avoid compaction entirely and just never get into that state? So I found a number of different things that I've started doing that have helped quite a bit with that, where you can have that really great context built up that's just perfect for what you're about to do, but you can go for a really long time without getting compacted. It becomes just a lot more dumb as soon as it hits. So one of the things I actually just posted about it today because my starting context was massive.
Yeah, I saw I saw your post. You were saying it was like 50% off the bat in terms of token usage. Like you just start up Claude Code, you read your Claude.md files, and it's already at 50%. Dude, what the hell was in your Claude memory files?
So what it was, if you use the /context command, which is amazing, and exactly what's eating up your context. So I used that, and it was mostly MCP tools.
Shit.
Yes, mostly MCP. And what happened was I had installed this Notion MCP because for a while I was doing a lot of like building using Notion as the backend, like Notion databases and Notion boxes for a project I had, and I just kind of left the MCP in there, not realizing that it is this massively, just that MCP took up like 10% of my context.
Dude, that's insane.
Yeah, which is crazy. And then, so I had that one. And then I have two other, I use Playwright, Linear, and Taskmaster all the time.
Yeah.
And the other one, Taskmaster, that one also, all MCPs, they take up a lot of, it's like 10,000 tokens each for all those three, for those three MCPs. And Taskmaster also has a CLI. So I just, wrote this little set of instructions for Claude.md to say, here's how you use the Taskmaster CLI. And I disabled the MCP. I got it working with the CLI.
Yeah.
And that took something like, so I went from like 12,000 tokens being used for the MCP down to less than 1,000 to tell it how to use the CLI. So that was, huge. That's what I was talking about this morning.
Dude, what's kind of crazy is I saw your post and I was thinking that like, oh, he must have just had really shitty Claude.md files. I don't think you should have said like, oh, by the way, it was the fucking Notion MCP server that had this crazy description on tools, resources, and prompts that was totally unnecessary that you wouldn't even think of that's where the context was coming from.
Yeah. It's because at first I was like, why do I keep, like I just start up and I build up my context and I'd be like 2/3 through my, I have this little, I've got a little custom status line that tells me what percentage of my context I've used up. And I was getting through it so fast. I assumed it was big Claude.md files or my sub agents, right? Because those all sit in the context.
Dude, that's honestly like, I wonder how much just shit and like context entropy is happening by just throwing in an MCP server, putting that in your home directory, so it's in all of your Claude sessions, and you realize, it'd be great to have Notion there, so you just always keep it around, but it's like complete context bloat because it just happens to be in every one of your Claude sessions that you're running, and you don't even think about it.
Yeah, that's definitely what happened to me.
Huh. Dude, that's, I did love when they added in the context window, or you could just like see the context to see where you were getting at. You actually, so one of the things we talked about a Sunday ago is your process of check marking different parts of the workflow, so that when you press it, so that you can like, you basically, I'll stealing your idea, and I thought it was brilliant. You would basically have a command that would say echo bookmark 1, or like, and say like, this is right after I had run all of the SQL commands, or basically a certain point in the flow. And then when you press escape, you can go back to different commands that you've entered, and you actually put in a command that was just a checkpoint, so you know different points in your conversation when you can go back to and pick up context from there, which is essentially a clear from that point in time, opposed to just a straight clear, which is going to kill everything. I thought that was a really that was a clever implementation.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, like clear from. Because that's what, when you hit double escape and you go back in your history and you just reset back to your previous state, you're basically undoing all of the stuff in between that, right? Like you're clearing up just up to a point. But what's awesome about that is if you get your context set up just right, let's say you're working on the front end code base in this, in your app, and you load up in your you do a few commands, you load up your context, you get it so it has all the right front end code and documentation and memory. You can solve a problem and then double escape, go back to that clean context, solve another problem, maybe get distracted chasing down a bug, and then double escape, go back to that clean context. And it's a way to just, get a lot out of, once you just get your context set up just right? Like get a lot out of it.
Totally.
Yeah, Nate, and Cousin here, and I can totally relate to that. And I think, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Cloud Code actually released some official features for that, because I know I used Cursor before. I jumped into Cloud Code, and they actually have like a timeline feature where you can actually go back to previous edits. Because one of the things I'm running into currently is that sometimes I want Cloud Code to fix a bug, but it did a bunch of things, wrote a bunch of code, but it didn't actually make a lot of change. So if I want to continue, I actually don't want it to continue work off of the changed code, right? I want to work it off of the original state. But right now, currently, there's not a very clean way to do that. So if they add that feature, that will be hugely helpful, right?
Yeah, the checkpointing. Because, you're talking about like checkpointing the actual code base, not just the context.
It would be actually kind of cool if the two could be married together. Like if you could have the context and the code be able to checkpoint state together. So if you wanted to roll back, you both roll back context and the code at the same time.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I miss most about Cursor, was just the code checkpointing was so nice. You could just go back and it would do that. It would do the two together, which was just like you're saying, which is really nice. Like, what's y'all's strategy for that? 'Cause at least with Claude Code, like the only thing I've come up with is basically just stage changes in Git frequently, right? So once I'm done with one set of changes, I stage them, and that way I have a clean Git view, so that when it makes a whole bunch more changes, if I don't like what it did, I can just use Git to, basically undo them.
Yeah, and there's also the Git work tree? Is it work branch, or it's the main? They've been pushing everyone to use it. It's like Claudium or some of the other tools that are more UI based on top of Claude. You can have multiple checkout branches working in parallel at the same time. So I've used that some, but a lot of it's like check, like all like I'm basically always staging, looking at the diff, and I don't like it, then I roll back. I was talking to somebody else, and they're basically committing every change, and then basically between every prompt, everything is a commit, and then they will have a commit message associated to that. So it essentially forces Claude to stay in the same lineage as the chat itself. It feels like it was a little heavy-handed, but they were saying it's actually working pretty well. So like if you're going to make a change, you're committing on that branch. And if you want to roll back, you can just roll back the commits. And then you also roll back the state at the same time.
Yeah, that's adding I've thought about that. I mean, I was doing that for a little bit, but it would just clutter up the Git history. Even though I'm working on a feature branch, it would just clutter up the Git history so much that I ended up not like moving away from that. And just after each little small set of changes, I'd review them and then I would stage them, which I guess you could do either one. You could either commit them fully or just stage them so you get a clean Git view. But it would be amazing if Claude Code added some kind of snapshot and rollback capability, but I don't know. I guess it's a tough problem to solve.
Yeah. One of the things that we were chatting about was how the Claude Code session management works and how like Claude Code stores that underneath the hood, which we went pretty deep into. So one of the things that if you use Claude Code -R, it lists, and you know this, Nate. If you press Claude Code -R, it's going to list out all of the sessions that you've ever launched from within that directory that you're working within. And then you're going to see like when that session started, its last modified time, its number of messages that are there, and then a brief description that Claude Code will use to summarize the conversation. But there's also actually a GUID, a unique ID for that session called a session ID. So instead of pressing Claude Code -R and then seeing the list of conversations that you can select from to resume, you could actually pass in that GUID. And that's actually a pretty powerful tool. So right now we're talking about, I want to get a Claude Code conversation in a really good state and check mark it. You can also just stop that conversation altogether and then figure out what the Claude Code ID is. And then whenever you start a new session with Claude, opposed to just pressing Claude and starting from scratch, you can do Claude -R and pass in that session ID. And then every conversation you have with Claude brings that whole previous conversation into context. And so that scenario where you're describing a Claude Code session where you get it in a really good state and then you checkpoint it, you could actually reference that state. Don't change anything, just leave it alone, and then exit, find the session ID, and then whenever you start again, just reference that session ID. And what's really cool when you do that is you don't actually create a new session, or you don't have the same session with a session ID. So when you go and work within that new session that you launched from the previous one, that doesn't pollute that previous Claude Code session. The way that Claude actually handles it, and this is pretty ingenious in my end, is it forks a new session. So when let's say like my session ID is 123, and I get it in an awesome state, I stop. I say, I'm not going to touch this session anymore. I just use this to create an expert. I can then go into the same directory, bash, clean bash, and I do Claude -R 123, and then it's going to spin up a new conversation with a new GUID, but referencing 123. Because what you can then do is you could actually start 5 new terminals right next to each other, and you do Claude R 123, terminal 2, Claude R 123, terminal 3, Claude R 123, terminal 4, Claude R 123, Claude R 123. So now I have 5 different conversations, all starting from that exact same state that I really liked, but none of them are going to pollute each other. And I can continue forward and do multiple different tasks from this state, which is like, that suddenly becomes very powerful because it's not just this one-time use. I can then farm that out. And then taking that one level further is the Claude-P command. So Claude-P has been in Claude since the very beginning. And what it allows you to do is be able to pass in a prompt to Claude like it's a CLI tool. And instead of opening the REPL, which the REPL is the read, execute, print loop, which is what like you enter in, you see Claude doing stuff, and it sends it back. It actually just runs it in the background, and so it is blocking. You can obviously run it and demonize it, but it's blocking, and you basically wait. And at the end of that, you see the Claude results. And so that's what happens. If you say like Claude-P, say hello, you're going to wait. It's going to do everything that Claude Code does in the background. At the end, it's going to say hi, hello from Claude Code or whatever. So if you take advantage of those two things and you do Claude dash, oops, sorry, I got some feedback on my end. But if you do Claude dash P 123, I'm sorry, Claude dash R 123. So I'm going to resume from conversation 123, and then I do dash P and then the actual prompt. Then I can actually run Claude programmatically, but start from a previous session state that I've curated for a specific workflow. And and so like that's been incredibly powerful for us, because we could then get Claude into a really good state when it understands the tool, it has perfect context, snapshot it, and then say, I want to farm out using this same state 20, 30 times. Maybe we'll do some scenarios where it might be 20,000 different invocations of Claude Code in parallel, but it's not starting from scratch. It's starting from a state within Claude that's really good. And this is almost like something that's one level above sub-agents, because one of the sub-agents are great. I think they're really good, but you start with no context management. You start completely from scratch. This is allowing you to do almost what the sub-agents are doing, but you're able to fork the existing context while not actually polluting the existing context at all. You can always go back to that same conversation. So being able to use like the dash P command with dash R and understand what your session ID is that you want to start from, super powerful concepts there. Claude, like they're obviously pushing in that direction. When they came out with like the Claude, they started rebranding the dash P command to the SDK. Like Claude, it was just the dash P for the prompt. That's all it was. And like, oh, now we're going to say it's the Claude Code SDK. And so they had this big announcement and big rebranding. And everyone was like, wait, there's no SDK. All it is the CLI using the same parameter that you've had since the beginning. And now you're saying it's an SDK. That's kind of bullshit. But I think in actuality, the way that it's set up, it is wildly powerful. And they've been very the forking concept. They could have made the option when you do Claude-R that it uses the exact same session ID and you continue from there. But they made a conscious design decision to fork a new session ID to allow that ability to like fork these different threads. And I think that there's from my perspective, there's tons and tons of possibilities on that haven't really been explored. At least that's one of the reasons why I wanted to host this Twitter session, because I think like that is a concept I don't see people talking about. I've made a couple LinkedIn posts about it around the power of being able to fork context and parallelize it. But I don't ever see anyone no one ever replies to it or comments on that, which is, I don't know. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you here, man. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing way to use the tool, and I think that probably the reason why it's not used as commonly is because that's really great for more operational use cases, like operational agents, like internal ops, or if you want data analysis agents, or you want these special purpose agents that can go out and do work for you, but you don't want to have to go and spend a bunch of time building up a lane graph, workflow and getting all the details right and everything that goes in, because it's a lot of work to get one of those right. Like if you want to build up an agent, like an operational agent for like your internal ops, like your data processing tasks that you've talked about, now you can write the effective code for this agent using Claude Code, just command. You just use prompts. You use commands. You use sub-agents or whatever. And I think it's really well designed for like the operational tasks, because for coding, right, I don't need to clone 40 different Claude Code instances because I don't have that much attention. I can handle one or two. But then once you start talking about operational tasks and you want to spin these up on demand, in an async process or something like that, it's super powerful. And I think the reason people aren't talking about it is because you're pushing, you're using Claude Code for like your ops, right? and for, outside of just coding.
Yeah.
And I think it's perfect for that.
And I think like just building on that, I think one of the great things about Claude Code, it was built by developers for developers for the purposes of writing code. But in order to accomplish that, it was more around allowing a language model to have very basic tools to interact with a command line, which developers have been using for 30 plus years in order to do coding work. But by the ends being writing code and the means are using these basic coding tools, you could repurpose those same means for another purpose that has nothing to do with writing code, but the tool actually might be the same. So it's almost like Claude Code's branding and naming is to some extent, I think, limiting people's perception of how you can actually use it to be able to do very fascinating things. Because you think about like, oh, what do you use Claude Code for? Oh, you use Claude Code to write code. And I think that causes a very myopic perspective on people's imaginations on what this very simple yet powerful tool can be used for. Because in the same way that the command line is a very simple tool, it's also incredibly powerful. And yes, you can use the command line to be able to write code. Like everyone's familiar with Emacs, everyone's available with Vim, although Emacs you can do a lot more than just write code. But you don't just say what's the command line for, it's for writing code. You say what's the command line for, it's for commanding a computer. And what can you do with commanding a computer? Well, I think we've proven over the last 40 years you can do quite a bit with commanding a computer. And that's exactly what both like Claude Code, then Codex, Rue, Klein, all of these tools have been building the functionality around. But now it's just that our imaginations haven't really been blown open on how you can actually use this tool and this incredible intelligence together to be able to do something that has nothing to do with writing code. Yes, it interacts with code. Yes, it probably might need to write a small script, and it might definitely need to know how to call out to other CLI tools, but you're not just using it for writing code at that point. And I think that, at least for us, that's one of the really big unblocks of being able to do a lot more than just like, I want you to write me a Python or an app or some ETL script. I want you to do it to use this to do work. And it's been great.
Yeah. I've gotten to a point now. I've reached a point now where I used to, if it's something that needs a true AI workflow, like you need to use LLMs, you need to use workflows. Like we can't just create a script to do it, right? It's some kind of workflow you want to build on top of AI. I used to either go to LangGraph or I just create a Python script or something like that would just do LLM callouts or whatever. But I've reached a point now where my default, like if I'm just building an operational workflow, my default is just to create a prompt in Claude Code.
Oh, totally.
Right, as my first pass, And then if for whatever reason, if it's not, it's not handling all the edge cases right, I might, put it into, build it out in code and spend more time on it. But like, it has gotten so good, like custom commands, they are so good at following step-by-step instructions and even doing simple control flow, like if statements and simple loops just through a numbered prompt. That's become my default at this point.
Same. And then like we can touch on the concept of CLIs, calling CLIs and turtles all the way down. I actually did an episode with Dieter from OpenBB Terminal a week ago on the Hedgineer podcast, where we talked about CLIs and there's this resurgence of using CLIs with like these CLI tools like Claude Code and Codex, where the language model has access to the command line. What does the command line do? Well, it calls out to command line interfaces. And so if you create an interface specifically for the command line is the tool that the language model has. Suddenly calling out to CLIs to do these tools becomes the default interface for a language model when that is its primary means of interaction with other systems. And so like the combination of custom commands with custom CLIs, like for me, that's a really good control plane between the non-deterministic path that language models inherently have and the deterministic path that precompiled or at least interpreted languages have when they go to execute. So like if you say like, hey, these are the tools that you have, and then those tools are CLIs that Claude knows about, and everything after that, once you pass in the parameters, is deterministic, it suddenly becomes a way for you to control what the model needs to be able to do non-deterministically and deterministically without having to write, like to your point, these massive frameworks around. And like, so for us, we've just been creating tons of CLIs. Like we'll have one generic CLI for writing SQL across different databases: Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, DBT, Databricks. And all the language model has to know is like, hey, if you want to query the database, here's SQL, pass in the name of the database, that CLI handles the auth, and then it prints back the results in pipe delimited data. So now the language model can start exploring a database across all the different databases that it has access to, and be able to understand it. If you want like another like CLI for like understanding an Airflow instance, I mean, it could just call out to GET requests via fetch. But it suddenly becomes very easy for it to interact with REST requests without necessarily having to go through MCP. I think what I didn't realize when you were like, what was kind of interesting, like for you, your context management, and one of the best unlocks that you had was actually drop the MCP, which was bloated, and then just write a very specific CLI instead of going through the MCP. Get just as good results, but you'd reduce context management a ton there, or your overall context window a ton. And like how much more like CLIs are going to start eating away at a lot of the work that MCP servers are providing. I love this resurgence of the CLI.
Yeah, me too. And in that case in particular, I mean, the benefit of MCPs is just that it makes stuff more plug and play. Right? It's because all it really is just an interface spec. And so, and then so if you're going to install an MCP, it's going to say, here are all the possible methods you can call. So it's going to have to describe them. And describing the interface spec is pretty verbose. So it just consumes a ton of tokens.
Totally. And it's a generic interface for a generic use case. And so like if you're relying on the MCP server provider for them providing the context for you, they're providing that same context for everyone else. And the likelihood that that's the optimized context for your use case is very small. Is it good enough to be useful? Yes. Is it, once you start having a lot of coordination across different systems and MCP servers, is the generic context that you're getting from a vendor or a third party good enough to describe how that data should be used within your workflow? Likely not. And so there's always going to be a need for context customization or like better contextualization for the services and tools that you're using agentically beyond just what do you get out of the box docs.
Yeah. I would love if they would at least, if somebody would at least add the ability to say, all right, you want to use this MCP in Claude Code or whatever, agentic CLI you're using, like choose the methods you want to expose. And maybe you choose, because I've got the linear MCP set up, and it's got, I think, what is this, 42? No, it's fewer than that, but it's a lot. It's more than 20 different methods. And I really only use like 2 or 3 of them, right? So I think a good middle ground would be is if you could set up the MCP and say, all right, I want to use the linear MCP, which is my issue tracking system. I don't need all these project commands. I just need to be able to list issues, get issue, and update issue, or something like that. I just need these 3 commands. That'd be a nice in between. But I mean, without that, I'm like, well, maybe I should just create my own little simple interface to swap it out.
Right. I mean, you can, with like a lot of the chat tools, define what resources, tools you want access to. Like I know if you use Claude Desktop, you can list out the tools for the connections and turn some of them off. I'm pretty sure you can. If I had to guess, you probably could go into the JSON.settings file in the .claude directory, either in your home or in the project, and tweak those. But they definitely don't make that easy. Because I'm assuming you got to go in, like if it does exist, you have to go specifically into the JSON config file for that.
Yeah. But to your point, I mean, for some of this stuff, it's like just either use the existing CLI or just, create your own script that it can just call.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? Like that's like more of your like, and I think that if you really want to be differentiated in how you're using AI, you need to be very thoughtful around the context of the data that you're injecting, and the context around it, beyond just the default MCP descriptions that you're getting from a vendor, because they have to figure out what's the best way for me to describe this tool for all of my customers and find that common denominator. And for some things, that's going to be great, right? Like for out of the box linear project management, you got like a ticket, you have issues, you have your teams, you have your project. If you want to actually get the underlying data, you hit those resources and pull that in. But for some MCPs, once they start getting more bespoke to your research workflow or to like your special sauce of your company, having the contextualization of those MCP servers in the way that you want your business to be interpreting a piece of information, whether that's like, yes, you can list out the customers, but like you don't want to be listing all of the customers. Like you really should be like subsetting the customers that are actually available to you. Like you don't need the long tail of the 10,000. And all of the other tools that might not be relevant. There's just going to be context engineering that's going to have to provide more information on top of the MCPs than what exists today. So I was actually like exploring something pretty cool where like we're creating a couple different MCP servers, and one of the things that I'm trying to think through is where in that pipeline do I want to use Claude Code, assuming that I treat Claude Code as an SDK, and do I want to have a MCP tool that is that's essentially the equivalent of a sub agent, where I give that sub agent a set of CLIs and context and some prompts and some docs, and then allow that sub agent essentially to be an MCP tool. And let's say that sub agent is do biomedical research, and I have access to PubMed and Visible Alpha data and like some other like data set. Let's say some other data sets relevant to the space. I don't want to go like too much detail what it might be. And do I just want to list out like the resources and the tools that can return data? So resources can be like drugs or therapeutic areas, modalities, companies, instruments, and the tools. And then like the tools might be like, oh, get me estimated drug sales, or get me like estimated number of like patients that might take this. Or do I want the tool to be like, deep research on drug sales and deep research on patients, where it's not actually doing a deterministic query. It's actually now calling out to a sub agent that I define context around research for. And then within that tool call, it might make 10 or 20 different CLI invocations and then send back that end the result and then stream kind of the results along the way. And so I guess we haven't really, do we want to push some of that contextualization and interaction with language models and data and decisions? Do we want to have that be part of an MCP tool and use Claude Code as essentially that agent framework? Or do we want to have the MCP server be a little bit more lightweight, have it just be the resources and tools, and then have actually the MCP client be the one that kind of does all that churning and burning, and figuring out how can we get the best success? And even in the latter, is Claude Code the right tool? I think it's a pretty fascinating thing to be able to throw behind agent frameworks. And to your point, it's very quick to kind of build and iterate on. It's a little bit less deterministic, but it's powerful, man. And like when I go back, like what I've been thinking on for a lot today, and I wish I had more time to test it, is like, what's for creating some of the more on the edge MCP servers, how much do we want to put an agent within the MCP tool itself versus let the agent cook on the client, and we just want the tool to provide clean, accurate data? What are your thoughts on that? I don't have an answer. I'm definitely, that's like the space that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Like, if the first thing I'm thinking about when I wake up, I love my wife, love my baby, and then I'm like, how far down the rabbit hole do we want to place Claude Code in an MCP stack is thought number 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just like anything, it's like what level of abstraction are you working at? So for very low level calls, like I need to query a database, or I need to, query, like to use the linear example again, I need to query, grab the contents of this linear ticket, right? Like the MCP is, or whatever you're using, CLI, MCP, whether it's CLI or MCP is really just a question of interface. Like what interface is available
totally
to you and what's the most natural thing. But so I think there will be certain things we'll put behind tools like that will be very simple. And then there will be, larger things. Like I think you mentioned deep research as a general, like that is a good, I could see that being a general purpose tool, which is like, okay, I need to go figure this problem out. We have this tool built, this agent built that does deep research really well. And it could be built with, Claude Code. You could be calling out to the OpenAI Deep Research API or anything like that. And so you're going to send off a request, and it's going to think for 10 minutes and then come back with the results, right? And I think we're going to end up with both, right? We're going to have higher levels of abstraction where you're calling an agent that has a lot of autonomy, or maybe a workflow that goes through a lot of steps, but it's a complex set of steps it goes through. And then and those will be behind an MCP, as needed. And then we'll also have other ones that are just like very simple ones. I think we'll end up with a tool set, and we're going to constantly, like if the last 3 to 6 months is any indication, the tools and the capabilities and, what we figured out how to do with these things, it all changes so quickly that what the best approach was even a month ago may not be the best approach now.
Yeah, man.
And so I think it's going to just constantly evolve. And so as we're thinking about the best ways to build things, I think just having us building the skill set to be able to operate at different levels of abstraction is going to set us up, to be able to adapt and to build the products we need to build right now, but then also adapt as things change.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing, the way I think about this is one approach could be how repeatable you want this process to be, right? If you think about a problem, if this workflow, if it is simple enough and it is repeated constantly, then maybe that's something we want a MCP server or like a Python script to take care of. So when I was building our process of automatically exploring a database, we realistically, our final goal is to have Claude Code be able to recreate some of the transformations that's within the database. And as I was building that pipeline, I realized when I asked Claude Code to do database exploration, that's a really big task. And when I break it down to subtasks, okay, maybe if you want to rebuild this transformation, you need to look at these tables. What's the schema? What's the data structure inside the table? In the beginning, I was just using the sub-agent to do that task, but I realized, okay, maybe I can just split this task even down further. Okay, one sub-agent to look at the schema, one sub-agent to look at how many rows are in there. Then I realized, okay, that's something that I actually don't need an AI to do. I can just write a Python script to deterministically get that answer, and it will be very fast. So I think one thing we can do is that we, as a project manager, we break down the task as much as we can. Then we'll realize some of the stuff are very naturally just becomes a Python script. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we can just use a Claude Code as an orchestrator that's replacing traditionally something a line graph would do. Because before I would build everything in line graph, somewhat deterministic, but it's kind of hard to get it right. But right now with Claude Code being so automatic, I don't have to worry about those stuff. I just need to give it the right tool and right context. So yeah, I think that could be one approach to that problem.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I was gonna say what I find interesting on that is that you get to that end state where you actually have a deterministic Python script that actually ends up doing a lot of the work. And somebody might say, well, you should have just done that for the beginning. But that's actually not an easy thing to like outline and write all of the code that you need to deterministically solve this relatively complex problem. And using Claude Code or an agentic framework to like slowly break down the problem further and further until you realize like, hey, there is actual no intelligence needed in order to do this task. There was intelligence needed in order to get me to the deterministic execution workflow, but there isn't a non-deterministic really decision that actually needs to happen anywhere within this like this work product or this thing that you have to do. But starting from writing all of the code to do that actually could be somewhat challenging. So even though you end up in a deterministic state where just code is doing the whole thing, is it a faster path to get there by starting to have Claude do everything, subagent, subagent, subagent? Eventually the subagents are so granular that it could be done in a Python script.
Yeah, because Claude Code and AI in general is very effective in getting you started. So it could plan out a whole workflow for you, and then it's up to you to iterate on that and then break it down further and further to get to that end state.
Yeah. One thing that you touched on a little bit, not to interrupt, but is the environment in which Claude Code runs in. And it's one thing to have it run within your VM or on a Mac or on a Windows WSL, or you can run it on the machine. But it's another thing to have Claude Code run on a server in parallel in the background. And the infrastructure you need for that is actually quite different than just a single server. And so one of the things I was experimenting with is getting Claude Code to run within Agent Core. And Agent Core is AWS's runtime for, they start with like LangGraph, and there's another tool they're trying to support. But I also think that is something that needs a little bit more support on the infrastructure side. Because right now running Claude Code on a server is actually not easy. I mean, you can do it, but like you start wanting to think like, oh, well, maybe I don't want it to be able to send out an email if it decides to while it's running autonomously for 24 hours. Or maybe I want to be able to limit what it does and doesn't have access to. Maybe I want to be able to like limit its memory consumption or memory usage. Or maybe I want to be able to like easily horizontally scale these instances. And right now, I think I'm sure there's other stuff like Agent Core. Agent Core is one of the first really good runtimes that I've seen from the hyperscalers come out. But they don't integrate natively with Claude Code yet, although you can get it to work. It is a general Docker container with a general runtime that if you wanted to push Claude Code into Agent Core, it can work, but it's not, you don't get all the bells and whistles how Agent Core is trying to add in like memory functionality and some other features there. But I think that's going to be definitely an area of innovation. I was talking to Kosti, the project manager at AWS, on this, and they were definitely interested in continuing to push that forward. And I want to be able to do a post on like how you can get Claude Code to run within Agent Core and then start horizontally farming that out. I just haven't gotten around to it. But that's another. And honestly, I see Anthropic in such a good position to do that. Because like so Anthropic already manages all the different sessions for you within your home directory. So when I was saying earlier, we do Claude Code -R, it lists out all of the conversations you've had. That actually maps 1-to-1 with your home directories .claude/projects/ and then they've replaced the / with the dashes, and that's like the name for that project in your home directory. And then if you look within that, there's going to be one JSON-L file for every conversation you've ever started with Claude in that location. And the name before the JSON-L file that's your session ID. And so if you want to ever get your session ID from a conversation, that's one of the easier ways to do it. If you also use like Claude -R, Claude -P and then -V for verbose, and then you do -- output JSON stream, it'll basically stream everything out, and one of those items will be the session ID. But anyways, getting back to what Claude's already doing is session management. And I'm like 90% sure that they're storing some of those sessions remotely, because I swear I've seen some of those get deleted and repopulated. which means that state must be stored somewhere. And it would be so natural for Claude to then take that off of your local, for Anthropic, to take all of those session IDs away from your local machine, store that within your enterprise environment. And so then anyone would be able to go and connect to that Claude session within your firm, and you can share it, which means you can also use that session on a server and farm it out. Being able to do that and checkpoint all of the conversations with a Git commit would then allow you to interact with the state of the code on that server, with the exact context, share that with your team. And Anthropic already has everything for you. Honestly, all they need to do is like throw it in some like big Postgres database. Each one of those conversations, honestly, they do it in blob storage, and then with additional metadata on the conversation, add permissions to it, give it a name, allow it to share with a users table, and they're just so close to having like Claude Code go from where it is right now to just exploding. The integrations they have, I think, with like Claude Code Financial Services. So Anthropic came out with Anthropic FIS. There was the Delupa integration, the CapIQ integration. I haven't actually heard that much on it lately. I know that they're pushing like the Claude Code in browser. That's definitely going to put some like with the financial services and Claude Code in browser. I don't know how Perplexity is going to necessarily kind of navigate through that, but I think they have something really special with Claude Code. And if they can get the server right and the enterprise right and the runtime right, they're just so well positioned in order to create like a very, very compelling agentic workflow for the enterprise. And they already have the data model for it. And like they already have all this stuff kind of already built. What's going to be cool is the second they're like, oh, press enterprise and for Claude Code, and you're like, oh, these are all of my sessions that I've ever stored across my team, and I can suddenly share them and I can see them because you already have all of this data built up that's just sitting in all of your users' home directories. All you need to do is just go and bring that all together, and you have actually this incredible data product that right now no one realizes exists. But the second you take those sessions, throw them on a centralized server so you can see everyone within your team and what they're doing, dude, wildly valuable.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And if anybody in this space has not gone and looked at that directory that Michael was just talking about, it's in your home directory .claude/projects, and just kind of browse through there and dig in, look at the JSON-L files, because each one of them is your full chat history on every session. And it's really, really interesting. Like I had some issues where I was using Playwright as a sub-agent, and it kept hitting like this token context limit, you know? I eventually found a workaround for it, but it just kept, I was like, I cannot imagine. Like it was just launching Playwright, browsing, I set up a script where it was browsing some images or whatever, and it kept, hitting errors because it was hitting the context limit. And I was like looking, I was like, what is going on? So I would look through the JSON-L session file, and I realized that even when I was asking it just to pull some text out of the page, it was sending this massive screenshot back every single time. And I saw it. It was just a bunch of whatever encoded images, like just embedded in this giant JSON-L file. And also what's cool about that is when you go back and look at these JSON files, is that suddenly you understand it's like, oh, when I hit double escape and I go back in my history to reset to a previous state and do kind of a partial clear, you can see exactly what it's doing. It's just trimming a bunch of those JSON-L entries off and letting you fork the conversation and keep going.
Dude, that's all it is, which is crazy. Like all it is just they have these JSON files, and then when you resume a session, you start anew, they just read that into memory, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
And I did the same.
Understand.
Sorry.
Like why just then it starts to become intuitive. Like why when you fill up your context as you get closer to compaction, it starts to become a little less effective because you just see all the, you see everything that's in there.
Totally. And I've gone into those files and be like, dude, why the hell? Like, and you know your context is big. Just look at the ls-ltaah, and you're going to see it sorted by your biggest conversations. Like the ones at the top, those are about to get compacted. And you can just go through, and you can also do like a grep command to say like, hey, which of these lines in this file is the most amount of bytes, and just go and nuke those. And you can do that with like a sed command and clean it up pretty quickly. So the ability to like go and do fine tuning of your context works really well. And if you ever want to, you can copy those across folders. So like one of the things, if you ever have the way that Claude manages sessions, again, exactly as Nate described it, it's done based off of the directory that you launch Claude from. But if you want to take a conversation in one repo and then move it to another, assuming the repos are in the same state, you can just copy that JSON-L file, paste it in the other directory within your Claude home directory, and suddenly that conversation shows up. And so you can reuse those JSON files is like for different sessions. Now, they're going to expect the repo to look the same, but if you have another Git clone of the same code base and you want to reuse that session, you can just copy that JSON-L file and send it over to the same location in your home directory, go to that and launch it in Claude, and you do Claude-R, you'll see it show up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, the place that I found that useful, because you're right, because your session history for a Claude Code instance is only relevant if you're in the same repo or the same project, right? It only makes sense within that context. But when I use Git work trees to do kind of parallel dev paths, and those are actually in physically different directories, but using the same repo. They're just on different branches of the same repo. So that's a perfect example where it's like, oh, I built up this context that I want to be able to turn into an agent and go reuse over and over and over again using the, Claude Code SDK. That's a perfect example where you might want to copy that over.
Oh, dude, for sure. It's also, I was telling you this. So I was in London a month or two ago working on a project with Claude Code, and it was like 7:00 at night, and I had been working on this project for like a week, and I hadn't checked it in a couple days, and it ran a rm-rf dot. It removed the entire code base, and it was I looked at it, I was like, holy fuck, like what the hell just happened? And it deleted the code base. But the silver lining was all of the conversation I had with that code base still existed in the Claude home directory for that project. So even though the code was gone, every conversation that I ever had still existed. And so within that, there's some interesting stuff. There were like list files, read files, update files. And so somewhere in that, a significant portion of the content and context of what I had done was there. And so I put on my big boy pants and said, okay, well, what do? I want to go talk to the agents or the Claude Code sessions that previously that helped me build this. So all the code's gone, and the first thing I do is do a Claude-C for continue my most recent conversation. I'm like, hey, I just deleted. Well, actually, no, the Claude-C was the one that deleted my code. So that was actually not a fun conversation. That was me saying, dude, what the fuck did you just do? You literally deleted my entire code base. Please explain yourself. And honestly, I wish I would have had like a more serious conversation with it, because I think that was a very unique state that it was in, and trying to understand why it ran an rm-rf dot. But I at least asked, okay, like now can you write a document of everything that you were just working on? What was the project? What was the state of the repo? What were the biggest challenges you had working with a code base that you could start again, that you would do from scratch? And so it actually wrote a pretty good documentation of what it had done. But then I looked at how many conversations I had, and there was somewhere around like 40 different conversations within this repo. Maybe not 40, but 20, somewhere between 20 and 40. And so then what I did is I wrote a Python subprocess to have that same conversation with each one of those sessions by using Claude-R, passing in the session ID -P. And the prompt in this case was, hey, you're working on like a software archaeological exercise where the code base that you had previously been working on was deleted. I now want you to document everything that you knew about the code base, how it was used, what was the functionality. If you could re-architect it from the beginning, what would you do? And each one of those sessions was each one of those invocations called out to Claude from that agent, or from the state that Claude was in when I ended that session. And it actually collectively produced a very great documentation. And I was able to get back to where I was relatively quickly, at least for not having anything. And actually the outcome was better than it was like previously. Like it actually was kind of nice to start from be forced to start from a blank slate and then see how quickly I can build back up, fixing all of the mistakes and all the unnecessary code that I previously had. But the reason why I'm talking about that right now is that was possible because the session state were stored outside of the actual directory you're working in that home directory in .claude/projects.
That's wild. So you had Claude go back through all of its previous conversations about that particular project and reverse engineer based on all those conversations, and then maybe some file, snippets or whatever, but reverse engineer exactly what it was and how it was supposed to work and what the issues were, so you could say, yes, okay, I want you to recreate this, but maybe even make it better.
Yes. What's fascinating about that is what I did it through a CLI. So I made a CLI for calling out to Claude. Well, I mean, it was a very lightweight wrapper. You kind of already have it, but I would have the master Claude code session start talking to specific contexts of other Claude code sessions where like Claude, when I'm working in it, is going to call out to Claude-R, pass in the session ID, and then ask a question, and then be able to have that Claude sessions answer it back and then have it go back and forth between the two. Now, one of the things in order to get that to work is that every time you the hack around this is that if you have a session with a Claude code, if you have a conversation with a Claude code session and you do it with Claude-R-P and you want to ask it a second question and you use the same session ID, that it's actually not going to remember the previous question that you asked because, as we said earlier, Claude forks a new conversation. So you need to know what is the new session ID of the last conversation that you had with that agent. And then if you want to ask a follow-up question, remember that session ID. And so that's where I was writing a CLI wrapper that would keep track of all of the initial conversations that I had. And then whenever I called Claude-P, I would pass in the session ID of that first conversation. But then the next time I want to talk to that agent or to that Claude code session, I have to get the new session ID because each time you call out to Claude-P-R, each result of that is a fork of a new conversation. So you have to do your own thread management if you want to keep your conversation going with a Claude code session using the SDK.
That's wild. Yeah. And then I'm sure it's creating new sessions as you go. So you got to make sure you don't include those in your old sessions.
Yeah. Which is what's awesome about that though, is it's built-in checkpointing. So like when you use Claude directly, and we were talking about how you were using the checkpointing earlier, where you might say echo, all right, this is checkpoint 1. When you just interact with Claude through the SDK, every message you send is a new session and is inherently checkpointed. So it has checkpointing by default, but then in order to manage the continuity of that state, you have to keep track of the checkpoints that you want to use.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
that's cool. I'm just imagining, sitting here imagining all the things, if you had a state that you wanted to look, you could just spin up Claudes using the SDK or the CLI with -P or whatever, right? But say load this state that I've built up I've built it up with the right knowledge and the right expertise and the right context to be able to do one thing really well and can solve this problem for me. And then
I built this whole app called Hedgineer, and it was all around state management and experts. So you basically start from a clean slate. And then you basically train, or you don't train, you just interact with a Claude code session. And then once you get it to a really good state, then you checkpoint that. And all you really have to do is have a database that has all right, what are your session IDs? What are name the session ID and then save it. And then whenever you want to run a new conversation with Claude, you basically pull down that conversation by looking up the session ID in the database, and then you can start from scratch. And so you then create these experts. So one Claude code session, yes, it's just being able to do effective, but that suddenly becomes an expert in a certain workflow or a certain task. The second that you like what the state that's in, let's save that, checkpoint that session ID, then when you're interacting, because like the app would be in a website or browser, and it would be interacting with Claude Code, and it's all using the -P command, so everything is natively checkpoint for you. You can just store like that unique ID, so the next time you call out to Claude, you look it up in a database, and like, oh, this expert for UI development, or this expert for risk, or this expert for research, or an expert for like doing back office reconciliations. For anyone that's not aware, I work in the hedge fund asset management space. So like my examples are primarily built around, you guessed it, the hedge fund asset management space. But you can basically create a Claude Code session that becomes an expert, give it a name, and then re-reference it at scale. And honestly, like Anthropic is going to do this. Like they built all of the core infrastructure to do exactly what I'm saying. And so building this at the rate that like Kat, who's the PM at Claude Code, and like the team is building, like doing these little nice to haves is like wrappers on Claude Code, I think are like just 3 months away of getting nuked. I think where like I try to compete is like, all right, let's use it as far as I can to add end value to a client, or to like I said earlier, asset managers and hedge funds, almost through a combination of services and software, and knowing that like that is going to be the last thing that I'm going to be, I'm not going to have a moat around. And if I can use Claude Code and some of these tools to be able to scale that like a SaaS business, specifically for this industry, that's the bet that I'm making as a builder right now. Yeah, sorry about that. Little ranty. You still there, Nate? Uh-oh.
You there? Can you hear me?
I can, man. Sorry about that. It might have been my phone.
No, it was on my end. It was on my end. I'm routing through my phone, and I just accidentally turned it off. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think they are going to build this into a general purpose, like async on-demand agent toolkit, and it's one where you code your agents with some combination of like prompts. It's just a bunch of prompts, and then doing a bunch of work to set up context, and then you have a quote unquote programmed expert agent. And there's all the stuff that you're having to do custom workarounds to be able to deploy these into cloud infrastructure so that your agent can be called on demand. Like there's going to be whether it's Anthropic providing it or AWS or whatever, there's going to be a first sell ability to just say, oh, I like this. I've got this Claude Code instance into a good state. I'll publish it and give me an API endpoint, and then I can just call it whatever I want.
For sure, man. Dude, hey, I actually like we've been chatting the whole time. There's actually some people that are in the session. Is anyone like out there like listening, want to hop in, share anything that they're doing with Claude Code or anything at all? Feel free to pass. I actually don't even know how I can bring people in, but if anyone out there that's listening wants to hop in, feel free to just raise your hand or ask a question.
And I just have a couple minutes left too, so I'm gonna have to drop here in a sec.
Yeah, dude.
I can talk longer next time. I just have like wife's out of town. So
for sure, man.
To go attend to.
I mean, honestly, with that, we can call it too. Dude, Nate, this is awesome. Honestly, I could do this all day long. We should do these more often. And like, if anyone's interested, like feel free to ping like myself or Colston. Like we live and breathe this every day, all day.
You cut out for a second, but I think you said you could do this all day, every day, and I 100% agree. So let's do it again.
Awesome, man. Okay, with that, hold on. Did I get somebody message? Nah, I don't think so. Well, hey, dude. Hey, Nate. This is awesome, man. Really appreciate you coming on. Anyone, feel free to reach out to both of us. Like, we met each other because we were in the Claude Code community space on Twitter. So, like, this is like what we're spending our free time away from our families thinking and talking about. So if there's anyone out there in the universe that has similar passions and interests, like feel free to reach out. We're putting ourselves out there. We want to meet you. And so don't be shy. Nate, dude, honestly, pleasure. This is not a goodbye. It's like, we'll talk very, very soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Great chatting. And yeah, I'll talk soon.
Take care, man.
Yeah, thank you, mate.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Cool.
Cool.
Are we still on to other stuff?
We are.
What's up, guys? I'm assuming there's nobody actually on the LinkedIn or the YouTube, but if there is, great to see you. Dude, ping me. Dude, say hi. Send me like a message. Say hi to Colson. Colson just joined us a month ago, something like that, and been just kicking ass and taking names, dude. You're doing an awesome job, so just keep it up.
Yeah, I love
Take it easy.